Your phone is face up on the table. You didn't put it there by accident. You've checked it 4 times in the last 10 minutes, not because you're expecting a work email. You're waiting for one specific name to appear at the top of the screen, and it hasn't. So you pick the phone up, unlock it, stare at a screen with nothing new on it, and put it back down, as if that action somehow changes what's coming. You know this is irrational. You know refreshing a silent conversation doesn't make it less silent, and yet some part of you keeps doing it anyway, like checking on a pot of water that isn't boiling any faster because you're watching it. Why does silence, the total absence of anything, grip your attention harder than most things that actually happen to you? Here's the part that reframes everything. This isn't about the person who isn't texting you back. This is about a mechanism in your brain that was never built for smartphones, never built for the specific torment of watching 3 dots appear and disappear. It's built for something much older, and it's currently being hijacked by a piece of technology it has no idea how to correctly interpret. Start with the strangest fact here. Unpredictable rewards are more addictive to the brain than predictable ones. Not slightly more, dramatically more. Picture 2 vending machines. One, every time you put in $1, gives you a snack. Reliable, boring, you use it when hungry and forget about it otherwise. The second is broken in a specific way. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes nothing. No way to predict which. People don't avoid the broken machine. They become obsessed with it, feeding it dollar after dollar, chasing the moment it might pay out. This isn't a flaw specific to gamblers. It's a fundamental property of dopamine called variable reinforcement. Dopamine doesn't fire most strongly when you get a reward. It fires hardest during the uncertainty right before you find out. Certainty, in either direction, produces less dopamine activity than not knowing. The worst state for your brain isn't rejection, it's the space right before you find out. That's exactly what your phone has become. Every time you check for a message that hasn't arrived, you're standing in front of the broken machine, and some old primitive part of your brain has learned that checking occasionally produces a small hit of relief. Not every time, just often enough to keep the behavior alive. That intermittent payout is the most addictive schedule that exists, because uncertainty keeps the dopamine system leaning forward, refusing to fully relax. This is why waiting for a message feels different from waiting for almost anything else. Waiting for a package feels like patience. Waiting for a reply from someone who matters feels like standing at a slot machine you can't walk away from. There's a second mechanism running underneath the first, and it explains why this particular silence feels heavier than any other kind. Decades ago, researchers noticed waitresses could recall complicated orders with total precision while a table's order was still open. But the moment it was paid, that memory vanished almost instantly. This became known as the Zeigarnik Effect. Unfinished tasks occupy dramatically more mental space than completed ones, because the mind treats incomplete as a flag demanding continued attention. A sent message without a reply is the textbook definition of incomplete. You said something, the other half hasn't happened yet. Your nervous system treats this as an open file, nudging your attention back toward it, not because you're weak or overly invested, but because incompleteness is one of the most reliable attention magnets your brain has. This is why an unanswered message from 4 hours ago can occupy far more bandwidth than a completed conversation from last week, popping up mid-meeting, mid-workout, right as you're falling asleep. It's not that this message matters more objectively, it's that this one carries a status flag, pending, and pending files get pulled back into view whether you want them to or not. Stack these two mechanisms together and you get something genuinely difficult to sit with. An open file generating a persistent pull on your attention, and a reward system treating every check as a possible payout. Separately, either would be uncomfortable. Together they can hijack an entire evening over a conversation that, from outside, looks completely minor. There's a third layer, and it explains why waiting for someone you're emotionally invested in feels categorically different from waiting on, say, a delivery driver. This layer isn't about dopamine or unfinished tasks. It's about what the silence starts to mean. Human beings constantly run an internal model of the people in their lives, predicting moods, intentions, whether a relationship feels stable. Under normal conditions, you get a steady stream of small data points feeding that model: tone, response speed, warmth, and how someone says goodbye. When someone goes quiet, that stream doesn't pause. It gets replaced by nothing, and nothing is exactly the kind of input your predictive brain handles worst. Your mind doesn't tolerate a data vacuum well. Faced with an absence of information, it fills the gap immediately, using whatever material is available, usually your own fears and prior experiences. The same 3 hours of silence can mean something completely different depending on who's experiencing it. Someone with a stable sense of self thinks they're probably busy. Someone carrying more relational anxiety reads the same silence as they're losing interest. This is exactly what happened last time. The silence itself contains zero information. Your mind, refusing to leave a blank space blank, writes a story into it. and that story usually says more about your own history than about the person who hasn't replied. There's an especially sharp version of this in the early stages of dating. Before trust has had time to build, every silence gets processed as higher stakes than it would be later, not because the person matters more, but because the internal model of them is still so thin there's little real data to counterbalance an anxious read. A 5-year partner who goes quiet for a day gets the benefit of years of accumulated trust filling the gap. Someone you've been seeing for 3 weeks doesn't have that reservoir yet. Every silence lands on unprotected ground, which is exactly why new relationships swing so intensely between euphoria and dread over gaps that would barely register later on. This is also why anticipation can feel more emotionally activating than the message itself once it arrives. While waiting, every possibility stays alive at once. Maybe they're thrilled, maybe upset, maybe this changes everything, and your nervous system stays electric the whole time. The moment a reply actually lands, that multiplicity collapses into one known outcome. Relief, yes, but also, almost immediately, a strange flatness, because the part of you so activated by not knowing suddenly has nothing left to churn on, which is why some people feel oddly deflated right after finally getting the text they were desperate for. The waiting itself had become its own uncomfortable form of aliveness, and now it's gone. So what do you actually do with this? Sitting there with your phone face up on the table. The instinct most people reach for is willpower. Just don't check it. This rarely works, and now you know why. You're not fighting a bad habit. You're fighting a reward system built to make uncertain outcomes irresistible, layered on an attention mechanism that treats unfinished business as urgent, layered on a meaning-making system that abhors a vacuum. Telling yourself to stop checking is like telling a smoke detector to ignore smoke. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do. It just has no idea it's responding to a phone screen instead of an ancient threat to your standing in the group. What actually helps is recognizing which mechanism is running the show, since each responds to something different. If it's the compulsive checking, the real fix is removing the machine from reach, phone in another room, rather than trying to out-willpower a variable reward loop. If it's the unfinished task pull, deciding consciously what you'd do if no reply ever came can function as manual closure. A mind given any resolution, even self-generated, loosens its grip faster than one left hanging. And if it's the meaning-making piece, the useful question isn't why haven't they replied, which has no reliable answer. It's what evidence actually supports the story I've written, which usually turns out thinner than it felt in the moment. None of this makes the waiting comfortable. It was never going to be, because comfort was never what this system was built for. It was built to keep you oriented toward high-stakes social information, back when a shift in someone's attention could mean the difference between belonging and being pushed out of the group. Your phone screen isn't that world. Your nervous system just hasn't been told the difference yet, so it keeps treating a lowercase text bubble with the intensity it once reserved for the question of whether the tribe still wanted you around, which means the ache of waiting for a message was never proof that something is wrong with you. It's proof you're carrying a very old alarm, wired for a different kind of silence, going off in response to something it was never built to interpret, a screen, staying dark, saying nothing at all. What's the longest you've ever waited for a message? And looking back now, what was the story you told yourself while you waited? If this put language to something you've felt more times than you'd like to admit, subscribe. This is exactly the kind of thing worth understanding about your own mind.